Recent data shows that Black Americans are 3 times as likely to die of COVID-19 than white Americans. So this week, we want to hear about the cultural and political impact of the pandemic on the African American community. So we've talked to former Attorney General Eric Holder and hip-hop icons Migos.
Of course, I want to help my folks. Of course, I want to look for families. Of course, I want to help the homeless.
Eric Holder was Attorney General under President Obama from 2009 to 2015. The first African American to hold that position, he had a huge influence on issues like same-sex marriage, voter rights, and criminal justice reform. He's now working to stop voter suppression and gerrymandering across America. Attorney General Holder, thank you for joining us.
It's good to see you, Shane.
Last time we talked, you were Attorney General under President Obama, and we were discussing criminal justice reform. Now, there's a lot of legal issues happening today, so I want to get into them. But first, let's check in on when we talked, it was one of the only bipartisan issues which both sides of the aisle were working on.
This is as diverse and bipartisan an array of members of Congress as you will see on any topic. And yet we are all unified in saying common sense reforms need to be enacted to our criminal justice system.
What's happening with criminal justice reform under this administration?
Well, I think under this administration, we've taken a few steps back and then maybe a couple of steps forward. Jeff Sessions came in as Attorney General and reversed much of the stuff that I had done. After that, the administration threw its support behind the First Step Act, which is a good thing, but really only takes us partially back to where we were at the end of the Obama administration. I still think this is something that has bipartisan support. It doesn't have significant amounts of support, however, in the administration, and they have really thwarted us getting to the place that we need to be when it comes to needed and widely supported meaningful criminal justice reform.
Now, another thing that's happening is voter suppression, gerrymandering, which you've worked a lot with on the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. And I wonder, since it's an electoral year, and a lot is being made of this, and COVID-19 is thrown a spanner into the works, if you will. What are the main issues now with voter suppression and gerrymandering for this election?
Well, I think that they run hand in hand, but the pandemic has given us a new concern, and that's how are people going to have a chance to vote? Are we going to repeat what we saw in Wisconsin, where people had to make a choice between their health and their right to vote? And that's why I'm supporting, I think the vast majority of people in this country are supporting about having a meaningful opportunity to cast a vote by mail. I like to call it voting at home.
So let's talk about that. This has become a hot topic, a hot button issue, if you will. President Trump on Wednesday targeted Michigan. There's also been talk in Nevada, a lot of tweeting going on about mail-in voting and being very negative against it. Why is that?
Well, I think Trump and some Republicans have this view that if you go to vote by mail, that will increase the number of people who turn out, and that does in fact happen. That is, I think, a salutary impact of having a vote by mail. But he seems to think that that will have a negative impact on Republicans.
You go and you vote, and ideally you vote with voter ID, and then you really have an election.
All the studies show that turnout increases, but one party is not favored over the other. But that is in some ways a tell. That's an indication that Republicans fear an increased turnout, and it is why they try to suppress the turnout. They try to select the people who should be allowed to vote, as opposed to what I represent, which is to have as many people vote as is possible.
We now have COVID-19. The pandemic is sucking all the air out of the room, probably rightly so. But it is a very hotly contested election. How will the pandemic affect this electoral cycle, do you think?
Well, I think in the short term, we have to be concerned about making the right to vote available to everybody. But we can't get so consumed with the virus that we forget the very important things that we have to focus on over the long term. And that is to make sure that we have a fair redistricting process in 2021, that we vote down ballot, not only for president. Now, this is an existential presidential election. I get that. But we have to make sure that we also focus on these down ballot races. Who's going to represent us in the state legislatures, where so many of the negative things are put forward: heartbeat bills, voter suppression laws, anti-criminal justice reforms. attacks on a woman's right to choose. Almost all of that stuff happens in the state legislatures, and that's why we have to focus and continue to focus on making sure that we don't have gerrymandered legislatures after the process in 2021.
Speaking of the woman's right to choose and the Supreme Court, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is in the hospital and she's hearing cases from the hospital. That surely can't be a tenable situation for a long period of time. What do you think about the makeup of the Supreme Court and, what happens going forward?
Well, I mean, I think that's certainly something that's on the ballot in November. It is entirely possible that the next president will appoint one or two Supreme Court justices, maybe even three. That's a pretty frightening thing. You could put in place for the next 20, 30, maybe even 40 years, a very solid conservative majority on the Supreme Court that frankly would be out of step with the rest of the nation. And so as we think about the impact of the Supreme Court on our society and who will select those 2-3 justices, that's something people ought to keep in mind as they're casting a ballot in November.
Yeah, I think that with partisanship at an all-time high and sort of, Congress galvanized into the parties, then everything moves up to the Supreme Court. So therefore, the Supreme Court takes on a huge importance, as does the DOJ. Now, lately, the DOJ has been under fire, Barr's been under fire for weaponizing the DOJ. Now Trump's tweeting about Obamagate. I don't even know what Obamagate is. What is Obamagate? And how is Barr weaponizing the DOJ so much so that thousands of ex-DOJ staffers or current DOJ staffers are saying, hey, you're weaponizing this department?
Well, first off, Obamagate is a figment of Donald Trump's imagination. And don't get bamboozled, don't fall for it. When I asked in the Rose Garden, what was the crime? He couldn't even say what the crime was.
What is the crime exactly that you're accusing him of?
You know what the crime is. The crime is very obvious to everybody. All you have to do is read the newspapers, except yours.
With regard to the Justice Department and Barr, he has certainly weaponized the power that the Justice Department has in service to his president. Unlike most attorneys general, certainly the best attorneys general, who recognize that they serve the people as opposed to a person. And he has used the power of the Justice Department to inject himself in a very political way, whether it's with regard to the Roger Stone case, the Flynn case, the way in which he mischaracterized the Mueller report. He's done a whole host of things to politically support this president as opposed to supporting the people of the United States.
Speaking of the people of the United States, recently, the government, I believe it's the FBI, has the ability now to just go to Google, get our search histories, our web browser history. We talked to Edward Snowden about the sort of decline of civil liberties under COVID-19 pandemic.
We don't have a data protection problem. We have a data collection problem. No matter how it is being used, what is being built is the architecture of oppression.
What are the legal ramifications of having our search histories and our web browser histories, available, for all time?
Yeah, I want to make sure that law enforcement has the necessary tools that it needs to keep us safe. But I have to say that with regard to, web browser histories, I would hope that you would have what is in place for the acquisition of most evidence, that you need to go to a court to make sure that you had a search warrant to get that information. I think that in allowing people in law enforcement to acquire that information without the approval of a court is a step too far.
Black and brown communities, as well as economically disadvantaged communities, have been harder hit.
Our culture really barely go to the doctor. We wait till it gets super, super, super duper serious, and that's just the way it is.
I think a lot of people during this pandemic, speaking of civil liberties or legal knock-on effects, some people are very hopeful that, this is a springboard into change, and others are very pessimistic, from a 30,000 feet level. What are your biggest hopes for a positive outcome coming out of this pandemic, and your biggest fears?
I think that the pandemic has been revelatory in a number of ways. it has exposed the truth that too many people were unaware of, that people of color, communities of color, are suffering when it comes to our healthcare system, exposed to a variety of things that makes them more susceptible to illness than other communities. And so my hope would be that coming out of this, that we would recognize that and put in place measures that will finally deal with this healthcare crisis in communities of color. Beyond that, I think that although this pandemic has created a significant number of challenges for us, it also gives us a great many opportunities. I think that we are potentially on the verge of another progressive era. We have been in a conservative era since 1980. It's time, I think, for that to change. And I think this virus can give us the opportunity to ask a whole bunch of questions and give us the opportunity to really propose new and effective measures that are more progressive in nature, and frankly, that are more supported by the changing demographics that make up this great country.
If you have a Supreme Court, with 2 or 3 more Republican judges, if you have a weaponized DOJ and, Trump gets reelected in November, a lot of people are going to feel disenfranchised. There's going to be a lot of frustration, especially amongst young people who are sort of seemingly losing their voice during this pandemic. I wonder, what advice would you give? What do we do?
Well, the people of this country need to understand something. Now, I'm not an alarmist, but our democracy is on the ballot in November. That really is true. Whether or not this is going to be a functioning democracy that represents the will of the American people will be decided by who we put in office, both with regard to the presidency and those races down ballot. If Trump is reelected and if the Republicans continue in control, we could have a Supreme Court that does not reflect the will of the people. We could have a Justice Department that uses the powers that it has in service to this president, which would further erode our civil liberties. And so I think, as I said, our democracy is on the ballot. That means that with regard to the presidency, those down ballot federal races, and especially what happens in the states.
Attorney General Holder, thank you very much for your time today.
It was good to talk to you.
Migos mean family, Migos mean brothers. That's how we've been since day one, since we came out the womb, we've been rocking. I won't trade them for the world, we won't break up for nothing, you know what I mean?
The pandemic hasn't just impacted the economy and public health, it's also had a huge and most probably lasting impact on the world of culture. That's why we got in touch with Migos, who have not only been recording during the lockdown, but who have also been working with food banks in their native Atlanta. Takeoff, Offset, and Quavo, thanks for joining us. So COVID-19 has hit Atlanta particularly hard. How do you feel that Georgia is going to be one of the first states that opens up?
I disagree with it. If the whole world ain't doing it. I lost my great uncle. He was a pastor in Augusta, Georgia. He was 82 years old. For them to just open it up, and to me, it's like, what about the people that lost people in this same state, in this same place that you're opening up? Just because people want to open up business. I understand everybody going through a crisis, but it ain't like it's one section, everybody going through it. So in my personal opinion, I just feel like it ain't fair because I lost somebody to it.
I feel the same as my brother. I'm with the social distancing. I'm just ready to get back out, I hope they find a vaccine for it so we can get back out and do what we do. But besides that, it's been good family time, family fun, working in the studio, but we're just ready to get back out now.
When we interviewed AOC about this, she talked about how Black and brown communities, as well as economically disadvantaged communities, have been harder hit.
Coronavirus has just blown open systemic inequality that has been long simmering in the United States.
How do you guys feel about that? Is this
true? It's true because we don't have the same resources, We got all this paper and we're successful, quote unquote, and still like these family members in our family that don't have or don't qualify for health insurance or they can't get it and they already 50 years old and they already have a health issue that they've been dealing with for 10 years. And it's like, when you don't got the sources and the funds, you just out of luck. And that's just what it is in real life. It's not a lot of resources. A lot of folks don't have no money. I know so many people in my family, in my friend's family, that don't have health insurance. And when you try to get it, I tried to pay up front, and that still don't work. You still got to go through different processes, and you still might not be eligible for this one thing, but you're eligible for this other thing. And it leads them to suffer or try to have a chance of surviving that's so small.
In our culture, we become doctors ourselves, and we, you know what I'm saying, and like our culture really barely go to the doctor. That's why sometimes you get the results that we get, because we wait till it gets super duper serious. My grandma actually passed to cancer like 4 years back, just because the fact that she didn't tell us and didn't want to, like, didn't want to scare us and put that fear in our heart that we was kind of losing her, and really we could have got her the best help in the world. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, that's what we do. It's a thing we do. It's a thing we grew up on, and it's kind of like built into our bodies, and that's just the way it is.
As you guys as a band and as individuals get bigger and more popular, do you start to feel more, I guess, politically responsible or socially responsible in saying, hey, we got to do something? Like, why is it that we're not going to the doctor? Why is it that, we're not getting the best healthcare? Why is it that we don't have universal healthcare for everyone?
That's the question. That's the question the world want to know. Like,
we try to make our music like be those not those problems. So sometimes we don't really speak so hardly on like the political side of things, because people got, to me, when it comes to politics, it's like people got their own opinions.
It's very sensitive too.
Very sensitive. When it's a thing like this where it's hurting our communities, we step up. We try to make the world be proud and be happy with our artistry and our art, and not with our politics, because to me, politics is how you look at things. This is me personally. It's like how it's each side and how they look at things differently. It's a sticky situation to speak on things when people really take this so serious that they'll fight on social media and threaten each other and get into it about an opinion on how our world should be, and we all live in one place.
And also, yeah, we rich, but sometimes we don't know either. We don't know how to start an insurance company for all the black people in the communities of black culture to help them get insurance, to help them go to the doctors. We don't have that resource. Only thing we have is money and success and jewels. And like, sometimes I'm 28 years old. Sometimes we need a big brother or someone that's been in the field of that politic field to come through and step down and grab guys like us and say, hey, I'm gonna put you down on this and that, and let's execute this plan and try to help people. When this mass of people, of course I wanna help my folks. Of course I wanna look for families. Of course I wanna help the homeless. Of course, me and Justin Bieber go do intentions and go to the center. You know what I'm saying? Of course, but when you put them outlets and you give us the socket, we gonna plug it in, just, you know what I'm saying, with us. Give us the info. We'll make it happen.
What does the future of touring look like? What does the future of music look like?
We really don't want it to be virtual. It's like taking the soul out of performances when you do virtual ones. The experience will never be the same.
I actually was looking at your first single and video, Taco Tuesday, which happens to be A, my favorite day of the week, and B, my favorite meal. How did you come to get Taco Tuesday as your latest single?
Taco Tuesday, man, it was just something organic. We want to give props to LeBron for just popping that whole little thing off with him just saying Taco Tuesday. Our producer DJ Darrell was kind of making a fun kind of like Macarena type beat, and it just clicked in our heads. You know, we the Migos, we make something about anything and everything real fast, and it just ended up being like a crazy hit.
We've been talking to some artists about, live has just sort of disappeared, recording is problematic. You guys are doing some weird stuff. You just did a never been done before, Oculus, Facebook, VR, live streaming to raise funds for Feed American Atlanta Community Food Bank. Do you guys see this as an opportunity to start commingling tech with music and live streaming, VR, AR? Is this sort of an opening of, okay, let's just do new things and throw all the rule book out the window?
No. It was just a partnership with Oculus and Facebook, so we could raise, so we could help the cause of COVID-19. We gave 200,000 meals, 124,000 meals were donated from that effort. Like, if people donated away from the 200 that we did on our own. We also sponsored gamers like Royal and Clutch on Fight to Farm Face Clan to get another 120,000 meals for our side of town, Gwinnett, where we came up in Atlanta, Georgia. Hopefully we get past this so we don't have to keep doing that. But we did that to give back and to raise money to help the people at home where we're from, because it hit Atlanta hard.
As artists and cultural figures, do you guys think about this when you're making music, when you're thinking about, okay, what does the future of touring look like? What does the future of music look like? You know, is it AR? Is it VR? Is it live streaming? Do you guys think about this a lot?
A lot, yes, because of the situation. We really don't want it to be virtual, because it ain't like, it's no feeling from a kid to see his favorite group on that stage right there. It's like taking the soul out of performances when you do virtual ones. The experience would never be the same if that was to be what we was working on doing now. Because when we perform, Migos, like, we touch our fans, we interact with our fans, like, we talk to them and make sure they speak back to us on stages, make them chant things. It'll take away the soul out of performance, to me.
All right, Migos, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.